contributing editor to the Jewish News Syndicate and a co-host of Israel Undiplomatic. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about those evacuations from Rafah. Does that indicate that we are closer to the start of this full-scale operation? We know we've seen some minor operations that have taken place, but does this mean that we are almost at that full-scale operation?
My short answer is I certainly hope so. Yes, I think that would indicate it. Listen, we're taking our time, and, thanks to a lot of unnecessary and unwarranted criticism from Washington, I think we've been extremely careful, overly careful, both about the evacuation of the civilians and about the humanitarian aid entering, and about how much we limit the actual operation.
What do we expect the full-scale Rafah operation will actually look like? I know there's a lot of questions, there's plans in place, but what do we know about what it could look like?
Well, look, I'm not a military expert, but I can tell you that the main goal of it is to eliminate the remaining, I believe, 4 battalions that Hamas still has control of there, and hopefully, even more hopefully, to locate the hostages. Probably Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas honcho who masterminded the October 7th massacre, is likely surrounded by a combination of hostages and also innocent Palestinian civilians. We need to locate them, and we need to locate him. And of course, this requires a delicate operation. Meanwhile, though, there are still massive amounts of terrorists there, and tunnels that we have to destroy the tunnels, and we also have to be careful while doing that not to kill any hostages.
What has Israel, from what we know, already accomplished there in Rafah? As I mentioned, the full-scale operation has not started, but we've seen these kind of minor operations that have been going on. So what has already been accomplished, so to speak?
Well, we have already taken over the border, the Rafah Israel border, on the Rafah side of it. And that's the border with Rafah as a border with Egypt. We have now taken control of the border, and that's very important because along that border is where there are serious battalions and tunnels. That's first of all. But what we've accomplished so far is that we've located and killed dozens of terrorists and located many more tunnels and tunnel shafts. And that's very important because it's from the tunnel shafts that the terrorists emerge. They come out, go back in, come out, go back in. And in some ways, in that respect, the IDF soldiers have to be extremely careful because, the terrorists don't have any humanitarian or other considerations. And they come out, they booby trap the tunnels, they come out at the soldiers from every direction. It's a very tricky operation in such a dense urban population.
You kind of already touched on this, but why? This is a question that's been asked a lot. Why is this operation in Rafah so pivotal, so important for Israel? We've heard Netanyahu say this is going to happen despite pushback from the U.S. So why is this so important?
Well, look, it's incredibly important, not more important than all the other places we've had to go through and clean out of terrorists. But there are where the last Hamas battalions are. Hamas has lost control of most of the northern part of Gaza. Now, it's true, there are still terrorists there, and terrorists still are escaping back up north through the tunnels. But that's not the same as the Hamas leadership having actual control. In order to defeat Hamas, the main thing that has to be done is to remove all their power over all their military power and their political power. That's the main goal here, aside from the other crucial goal of finding the hostages and rescuing them.
You're the former advisor to Netanyahu, so I want to ask you this specifically. What is the overall thought on Netanyahu? How do the people of Israel feel about Netanyahu as a leader there? And how has that kind of changed over the past 7 months since that October 7th attack by Hamas?
Well, I can answer that better now that I'm no longer an advisor at the Prime Minister's office. I left a couple of months ago, and it's much easier for me on the outside to judge what the public is thinking. I also have family members fighting in Gaza. It's much, much easier for me to get a sense of the public when I'm not inside a kind of bubble. The sense is this. Right after, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, all Israelis were in deep shock, naturally. We were all traumatized. It was the most horrific thing we've ever experienced. And so naturally, everybody, the leadership, the army, everyone was blamed for not having been on the ball enough, not having anticipated this horrific attack, not having rushed to the scene quickly enough. So at that moment, everyone was just against everyone at the top, and that includes Netanyahu. But after we sort of got our bearings and after the army got its act together, most Israelis, certainly in private, said, well, it's a shame that Netanyahu was heading the government when this happened, and maybe he has to go when the war is over. But thank God he's the one conducting this war. And that is a sense you don't get when you watch the mainstream media. You would think that all Israelis are out in the streets protesting him, but actually that's not true.
One more question before I let you go here. So the ICJ, we've talked about that body of government for quite a while here, expected to convene Thursday and Friday to discuss emergency measures that are sought by South Africa over Israel's full-scale operation in Rafah. They are trying to stop it. So I want to get your thoughts on whether it's likely that the ICJ would even rule against the operation. But on top of that, does it even matter to Netanyahu? It sounds like he's not going to stop the operation regardless of what the ICJ decides.
Well, look, the ICJ doesn't exactly have authority. Well, it has authority, but it can't enforce it, as we've seen with its decisions on Russia and Ukraine. And the ICJ had a ruling about Israel at the end of December, I believe it was, that said that we are not actually committing genocide in Gaza. It was a surprising ruling, I must admit, because it is such a hostile organization. And South Africa is so anti-Israel, and they tried desperately to get a ruling that Israel is committing genocide. So the ruling wasn't very friendly, but it said that we can't rule out that maybe some of what Israel is doing fits into that category, but it didn't actually rule on that. Now we get to Rafah. It's possible that there will be a ruling against it. I actually don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the ruling was against an operation in Rafah. But Netanyahu cannot abide by such a ruling. If such a ruling were to emerge, he cannot abide by it. You understand that this is not an elective war. This is a war that was forced upon us by barbarians, brutal, who say that they will commit an October 7th again and again and again if we let them. And we cannot afford as a country, as a nation, to end this war without a victory. We just can't.
Ruthie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and provide some context to all of this that is going on. We see these developments happening pretty much on an hourly basis. I always say it. But is there anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Just one last thing. The world pressuring Israel is appalling. All that has to be done to end this war is to have Hamas lay down its arms, to surrender. That's all that it would take. In 1 second, the war would end. That's what I would like to add.
All right, Ruthie, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh, for having me.
Of course. All right, well, I do want to take you back out to this live